Hey everyone, I'm David Aragona, and welcome to the August 16th edition of Horses to Watch, where we carefully analyze trips from the last week, looking for horses that encountered adversity and could be worth betting back when they run back in the future. This was a really interesting week of racing at Saratoga, August 10th through 14th. Some track bias situations, both on one of the turf courses and a little bit on the main track. We're going to focus on turf races for this edition of Horses to Watch. If you want some notes on the main track, I do think that it was a little bit speed favoring on Wednesday. Also, Saturday's card appeared to feature a little bit of an inside bias, a little bit of a speed favoring situation. So something to keep in mind moving forward. But given the number of turf races they run at Saratoga, you're only getting like 4 or 5 dirt races per day. So it's a little bit tough to be sure of those track biases. But I do think that we saw some situations where forwardly placed horses did well on the dirt this week. But we're going to focus on the turf races, as I said, and we've got 4 replays to check out on this edition of Horses to Watch. Mostly inner turf races, but I do want to begin with one race from the Melon turf course that was last Wednesday, August 10th. Race 3. This is a New York bred 2-year-old maiden special weight event going 5.5 furlongs. Let's break these runners from the gate and focus on the number 6. It's all coming together in that light blue cap, just getting completely clobbered between horses. I like that they show that head-on shot of the replay on the pan because you really get a good view of what happened to this horse at the start. The number 9, who you now see on the early lead, just made a left-hand turn coming out of the starting gate and basically took out half the runners in the field, including this number 6. It's all coming together, who, as you can see, after that early trouble, just found herself or himself at the back of the pack in the early going. And I think that this first-time starting 2-year-old actually does pretty well to get up for third in this race, and you might wonder if he could have won if not for that trouble at the start of the race, because this is a race that was mostly dominated towards the front end. That opening quarter that you see in 22 and 4, really not that fast for this distance. And the race is just dominated towards the front by the number 9 and the number 4, who ran 1-2 throughout. It just changed positions at the end. But do check out that number 6. It's all coming together, who in those brown and blue, light blue silks is now coming through between horses to secure third place. I thought this was a pretty good debut effort for this Phil Serpy trainee. This was the first runner from New Sire Weekend Hideaway, a likable New York bred who ran in stakes races for many years, going back to the early 2010s. The dam, Lady Court, she has produced a couple of multiple turf winners, including Lady Joan and Goodbye Broccoli. So this is a really good turf family, and I think that this runner will run a lot better if he's able to achieve a clean start in his next race. Now, I want to move on to some of those inner turf races that I talked about towards the top of the show. It was a situation this week at Saratoga where they took the temporary rails down on the inner turf course. So the horses were racing at the 0 feet rail position, basically right down on the hedge. And typically, when they take down those temporary rails, that fresh, untouched ground down close to the hedge is where you want to be. Saving ground is always a good idea on the turf, but racing on that fresh ground really seemed to give horses an advantage. So racing in the one path in turf races seem to really be the key to success. So I'm going to talk about some horses that did not get great trips, really wide trips on the inner turf course from this past week. We're going to begin with one from last Thursday, August 11th. This was the last race of the day, race 10, a New York bred maiden special weight going a mile on the inner turf course. Let's break these runners from the gate, and I'm going to focus on the number 8, Capital Gal. If you read my NYRA analysis, this is a horse that I was somewhat interested in from a wagering standpoint because she was making her turf debut with a little bit of pedigree by Constitution, some dam side, second-generation pedigree on this filly. Just gets the wrong trip over this turf course and really a bad trip into the first turn. You can see there her rider, Eric Cancel, just kind of losing position on her, not securing or going forward coming out of the starting gate. And he just winds up getting steadied back behind runners heading around that clubhouse turn. This is a real problem for this jockey on many occasions. Even when his horses break well, he just seems to kind of not want to stay in those precarious spots in traffic, will steady his horses back to get out of those difficult positions and typically loses position and winds up towards the back of the pack. And that's exactly what happened with Capital Gal in this race. She is now all the way back in 11th of 12 runners moving down the backstretch. And things are going to get a little bit worse, because I want you to watch the trips from the half mile home between the number 8 Capital Gal and the number 11 Succulent, the difference between the two of them. Succulent is the horse that's right behind Capital Gal, just kind of leaving the screen right now. Dylan Davis on Succulent in those black silks with the orange sleeves is going to stay on the inside and save the ground, something you had to do on the inner turf course, whereas there is Capital Gal wheeling about 4 or 5 paths wide into the stretch to try to make her rally. That's just not something you wanted to do on this turf course the past week, and she is just out of position really for the entire duration of this race. That horse who did get that inside ground saving trip coming into the stretch will eventually finish second. It was a great ride by Dylan Davis on that number 11 Succulent, but I do want to give some credit to Capital Gal for getting up to 5th by the time they crossed the wire in this race, because she was all the way back in last of 12 at the top of the stretch. If you look at Trackist numbers, she put in the 3rd fastest final quarter of anybody in this field to run up to 5th place by the end of this race. I do think that she showed some turf ability here, despite the fact that the trip just didn't really work out for her, and she's one that I would be very interested in if she's able to get back on turf next time, hopefully with a different rider on her back, or at least a better trip from this rider. Let's move on to another race on the inner turf course, going the same distance, fast forwarding to Friday's card, August 12th. Once again, this was the last race of the day, race 10. It is the New York bred allowance. Non-winners of one other than, as I said, going a mile on the inner turf. And let's take a deep breath before this one, because I want to focus on 3 different horses in this race. So we're going to try to watch 3 different trips at the same time. Let's break these runners from the gate. The horses that I want to focus on are number 5, number 10, and number 11. The 5 is Candy Monet, the 10 is Master of the Tunes, and the 11 is the favorite in this race, She's a Mia. Heading into the first turn, pay most attention to the number 5 and the number 10, because number 10, Master of the Tunes, is going to get spun out a little bit as a rival inside of her gets rank, and the horse that's really going to lose position is the number 5, Candy Monet, who just goes widest of all. You can see her almost bolting heading into that clubhouse turn there, going about 7 or 8 paths off the rail. As I was saying, you want to be on the rail in these inner turf races, and this horse, Candy Monet, just wound up out in the center of the racetrack all the way around the clubhouse turn. And I'm going to only show the pan replay of this race, not the head-on, but if you do want to check out the head-on, it's really worth a watch for Candy Monet, the number 5, because she is literally in the 4 to 5 path for the entirety of this race, going about 5 wide around the far turn as well. She loses a ton of ground in this race, but I do want to also focus on the number 11, She's a Mia, because I think she's the horse that a lot of people are going to focus on for having a bad trip coming out of this race. And I think she had a lot of things go right for her. She's towards the back of the pack right now. She's actually all the way back in last place in those light blue and white silks. And her rider, Joel Rosario, does not have her in the best position, kind of behind some runners with nowhere to go. But he is able to cut the corner here and save ground coming into the stretch. That's what you wanted to do. Not the case for that number 5, Candy Monet, or the number 10, Master of the Tunes. Those 2 horses that were coming widest into the stretch there. Candy Monet was the one that was 5 wide at the top of the stretch. She just got a ridiculous wide trip in this race. But do focus on that number 11, She's a Mia, because she's trying to make some progress right here, angles out, and right there, Joel Rosario in that white cap with the turquoise silks is just going to encounter traffic trouble, and he just has to basically sit on her, unable to ride her for the final 16th of a mile of this race. And I think people are really going to focus on that, the fact that she basically was steadied in the last 16th, and maybe she would have been 2nd or 3rd in this race if not for that late trouble. But let's keep in mind, She's a Mia was the favorite in this race. She did save a lot more ground than those other 2 runners that I highlighted, and I've actually got some Trackist data to read off to you. The winner of this race, Theodora Grace, got a fantastic trip. She covered the least ground of anybody, but She's a Mia, she only covered 25 more feet than the winner, which is significant, but she did save ground at some critical junctures of that race. Aside from that trouble that she had at the end, I thought all in all, She's a Mia got a decent enough trip. The horses that were really affected by ground loss in this race were that number 10, Master of the Tunes, who covered 54 more feet than the winner of this race. And if you look at the average speed that these horses maintained for their trips on Trackist, which takes into account ground loss and the final time these horses ran, Master of the Tunes, despite finishing, I believe, 6th in this race, actually maintained the highest average speed of any runner in this field. So arguably, she could have won this race with a more ground-saving trip. And then there's Candy Monet, that number 5, who traveled 90 more feet than the winner of this race. And oddly enough, even though Candy Monet crossed the wire last of 12 runners, she maintained a higher average speed, according to Trackus, than winner Theodora Grace. So this was a topsy-turvy race where the ground loss and trips really determined the results. So definitely one that you want to pay attention to moving forward. Both Master of the Tunes and Candy Monet, who I think were negatively affected by the ground loss and just the fact that there seemed to be an inside bias on the inner turf course this past week at Saratoga. All right, let's do one more replay from that inner turf course last week. It's from Sunday's card, August 14th. This is race 2. It's a maiden special weight for 2-year-olds going 1 mile and a 16th on that inner course. Let's break these runners from the gate, and I want to focus on the number 9, Forever Dixie. She breaks pretty well, gets decent position in mid-pack heading towards the first turn, but you're going to see the runner right to or inside, I believe the number 6, kind of gets an oddly hustling ride by Jose Ortiz, who I don't know where he thinks he's going right now, but he's trying to hustle her into position. And when he's getting this horse keyed up, heading right into a bend soon after the start, no surprise that she goes a little bit wide. And you can see right in behind her, Forever Dixie was trying to tuck in, and she just gets a little bit steadied right about here. You can see that her rider, Dylan Davis, has to steady her back off heels with horses in front of her. So just not an ideal situation for an inexperienced 2-year-old filly. This Mark Casse trainee was just making the second start of her career, her first start on the turf after she had debuted sprinting on the dirt at Churchill Downs in her career debut. From here on out, things go okay for Forever Dixie until they get to the quarter pole, which I'll talk about in just a minute. But as they move down the backstretch, I do want to take note of the horses that are riding the rail in this race. They include the number 2, Beautiful Navigator. She ends up finishing 4th, but also the number 1, who ends up finishing 2nd in this race, and the number 8, MoMA, who wins the race. So the 1st, 2nd, and 4th place finishers spent almost their entire trips riding the rail. And as I was saying, that's where you wanted to be on this inner turf course. Not the case for the number 9, Forever Dixie, the horse that I want to highlight, who was in the 2 to 3 to 4 path the entire way. And right there, you can see once again, she gets pushed out, steadied a little bit, and then again, steadied right there as Dylan Davis tries to straighten her out for the stretch drive, angles back inside of some tiring runners, just a little bit of lugging in for a 2-year-old, something that you're accustomed to seeing with these inexperienced runners. At that point, when she leaves the screen, it looks like she's getting nothing in this race, but she actually finishes up decently to just miss getting up for 4th, actually only finishing a length out of 3rd place here. She was really running across the wire, and I think she was just the kind of horse that was out of position, kind of in no man's land for the entire race, and did some running at the end. There is some turf pedigree here. She's by Quality Road. There's some turf breeding on the dam side. I thought she was going to like it based on the way she ran on her debut, and I think that she did show some deceptive turf ability. The trip just didn't work out for her. She was against the way the course is playing. So I really think Forever Dixie is a horse that you want to give another chance to when she gets back on turf in her next start. So those are all the horses to watch for this past week at Saratoga. If you want to follow these horses moving forward, you can add them to your horse watch on DRF.com. Just add them to a list on the DRF website, and you'll get email notifications when these horses run back in the future. Thanks for tuning in this week, and make sure to catch future episodes of Horses to Watch on upcoming Tuesdays during the Saratoga meet.